I put it on my board. I have like this board of flies because each fly that I've hooked, it reminds me of a specific time and the conditions of when I hooked that fish. So yeah, I actually right now I'm staring at that orange heron I tied, I think 4 years ago. I'll probably never tie another orange heron, unless someone begs me to.
That was Adrian Cortes talking about his Steelhead Fly Hall of Fame. We're going to make steelhead fishing easier today by making it harder. This is the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show.
Welcome to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show, where you discover tips, tricks, and tools from the leading names in fly fishing today. We'll help you on your fly fishing journey with classic stories covering steelhead fishing, fly tying, and much more.
Hey, how's it going today? Thanks for stopping by the Fly Fishing Show. What is the easiest way to support this show? If you head over to wetflyswing.com/members and buy me a cup of coffee. A cup of coffee is what keeps me going strong, and you can join the members society for about the price of a cup of coffee. So appreciate that in advance. Adrian Cortes is here today to shed light on how he catches winter steelhead using a dry line in the winter. We talk about the best iron to get your fly down, what type of water you should be looking for, plus one of the best resources for tying in hand. It's time to add another challenge for the winter. So without further ado, here is Adrian Cortes. How's it going, Adrian?
Very well. Good morning to you, Dave, and thanks for inviting me on the show.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on here. I was, I'm struggling. I struggle a little bit thinking about it because I've been thinking about getting you on for a while. You and Todd Hirano. I mean, there's a number of people out there that do some skating and stuff. And funny thing is I've interviewed Richard Harrington recently, and we talked about skating. So it feels like I think maybe I want to dig a little more into kind of your dry line, maybe winter fishing with dry line. So maybe we'll dig into that. But before we get there, can you just talk about how you first got into fly fishing and then how you brought that into everything you're doing around steelhead?
Oh yeah, back to the dark days. No, actually, the Enlightenment, huh? I was born in the islands and the Philippines. Came to the States when I was 7 years old, and I was always intrigued by fishing, gear fishing, catching fish. And I guess just growing up, I always thought fly fishing was kind of, I don't know, it wasn't for me. It was kind of a wussy rod, and I was always into big, bass rods or big saltwater sticks. And so I never really was intrigued by fly fishing, although my friend tried to get me into it. But it wasn't until I got married and my wife and I were doing a camping trip in Yosemite, on the backside of Yosemite. And I had my spinning rod. We were newly married. It was in the evening, and I was really trying to prove my manliness by catching trout for dinner for my wife. We drove up to the lake. There's no one there. It was beautiful, beautiful, calm, serene. And then all of a sudden, you started seeing bugs hatching and trout rising, hundreds of rises. And like any typical young male, jumped out of the rig, grabbed my spinning rod, and tried to show off to my wife. And tried to throw a spinner out there, and I couldn't catch a dang trout, man. So
No kidding.
I was frustrated. Yeah, I'd see trout, chase the lure. And my wife, she kind of just giggled at me or made some sort of remark that embarrassed me. The next day, I decided to go over to the local store in town, and I think it was a Kmart. And I bought like a made in China fly fishing outfit with a cheap fly rod and some flies that looked like they came out of I don't know, man.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Some
Like
yeah,
some dry flies. They look like they kind of like were a dry fly or maybe a wet fly. You couldn't
yeah,
tell.
yeah, yeah. They were huge and attractive, and that's what got me into fly fishing because I couldn't catch the trout. And it's been a fun journey since. I guess it was for me because I can't catch something. It makes me more, I guess, challenged to try and catch it that way. And I don't know why it is in my mindset. If something's too easy,
Yeah.
I get bored. So that's how it started.
Cool. So that that gives us a little perspective, and I think like you said, the challenge. I think that's the thing we all joke about it, right? Steelhead fishing. Sometimes hours and hours of not
Yeah.
catching, and it can be challenging. So yeah, I think that's why we're all here, and you take it another step further because you also skate, and I think you also do some tying in hand, which is a fly tying challenge. But hey, before we get into more of that, I wanted to check. You mentioned the Philippines, and it's interesting. I love sometimes digging into some of this stuff because myself, I grew up, when I was 7, and I've actually had a daughter now that are 6 and 8. I got 2 daughters, and it's interesting because, right, they have this perspective. But what was your perspective now coming from the Philippines when you were 7? What do you remember about coming to this country? Is there anything that
Oh
rings a
yeah.
bell?
Yeah. There's so many sounds and smells and excitement. I mean, living on the islands and then coming over here and you hear about things like McDonald's or
Yeah.
Disneyland, you know, like really nice cars in cold weather. I just recall even landing in the airport, the temperature change was significantly different. I remember the first cheeseburger I had at McDonald's. I thought it was huge and there was no way I could finish it. And in fact, I didn't really like it. But I do remember one thing, Dave, as far as taste. I had my first bag of Doritos,
Yeah.
and I thought that was sublime, man. I thought these things were the most magical food that as a kid.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's amazing. You know what's cool about that is that it's very similar to me in that I remember the first time I had an older brother who was like 10 years older than me, or who is, older, and he brought me to McDonald's to have a cheeseburger, my first cheeseburger, like way back, and it was such a cool thing because my big brother brought me to make, you know what I mean? It was this funny thing, and then
Yeah.
also the Doritos. Just recently, my daughters, they don't get a lot of the snacks, so we try to reduce that, but I think my younger daughter had her first Dorito, and she was just like, "Oh my God, this thing is amazing."
Nice.
So they haven't they
Yeah.
have they haven't changed that much, I guess, over the years.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
I think that kind of translates to, I mean, that as far as fishing, I think we're all kind of kids in that way. Whenever we discover something new, or we hook that fish that we didn't expect to hook, it's that excitement. It's like opening up a new bag of food and you're like, man, that's
yeah,
amazing.
that's
And
it.
enlightened.
That's it. No, you're totally right. I forget about that too, but that's what it comes down to is that we all love, even though we get older, we never feel like, you don't feel like you're that old. You still feel like that kid. I think do you think most people are like that? Is that how you feel that even though I'm not sure what age you are now, but you feel like you're still kind of that kid?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm 44 or
Oh yeah,
something like that.
we're the same age. Yeah,
I stopped, oh, okay. I stopped counting when I was 40.
I
For some
know.
reason, I was disturbed. It's like, man, I'm that old. But yeah, I think we're all kids in a way. That as far as fishing is concerned, that connection to a fish, something underwater. I mean, it's just kind of I don't know, a kid-like feeling. You start feeling that head shake, that throbbing as a fish is fighting, and then that jump. It's exciting. Not all people are fishermen. I have 2 daughters as well, Dave.
Yeah.
And one of them, she absolutely does not want anything to do with fishing, and
Nope.
the other one loves fishing. That she gets excited when a fish is on. So we're all different, but those that are excited about a fish being on, I think we carry that. Well, at least I believe I do carry that all the way to my grave.
Yeah.
In fact, my buddy Todd and I were just at a excuse me, a desert river yesterday, and we were thinking about how exciting it is. We're like, as soon as the recess bells ring, Todd brings this up. Like we're kids, we're just out, out in the field playing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm in my 40s, he's in his 50s, and so we just have a good time. We're like kids out there in the desert river,
That's
having a
cool.
good time.
That's cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Todd's name, I mean, I've been doing this, a few years now, and I think your name comes up, and then Todd, you guys are always the two names together. Are there, I mean, I guess, how is Todd? Are you guys pretty similar in your fishing? And I know you guys do a little skating and things like that. And are there other people out there that you guys are hanging with that are kind of doing, I guess Richard, we mentioned Richard Harrington. But it seems like
Yeah.
you guys got this little crew out there.
Yeah, it's fun. It's neat. You develop friendships and you develop, camaraderie with certain people that we all kind of fish the same way with a good group of people. It's and we get along that way. We kind of fish the same way in terms of our idea, but we're not exactly alike, which is fun. I mean, we can't all be robots. We give a variety of different thoughts on fishing, fishing the dry fly. Yeah, there's Rick Harrington. There's I don't know if these guys want their names put out, but there's Lee, there's Keith, there's Jeremiah, there's Bucky, there's there's a bunch of guys, and every once in a while we all meet together and have steelhead camp. Obviously, it's a little more difficult during this pandemic, pandemic times. So, but we don't get as close to each other as we used to in terms of distance. But yeah, we enjoy each other. I think the connection with Todd really came about through the internet. I started steelhead fishing just because I lived close to a steelhead river, and I was a trout fisherman. I always thought I was going to be a trout fisherman. I thought it was the most challenging way to fish. You needed a certain observational prowess to catch trout, match the hatch. What are they feeding on? But there was a steelhead river down the road from me, and I read a few books, like you mentioned, Dave. It's, The Fish of 1,000 Casts, reading about people traveling thousands of miles to a steelhead river only to get a tug or a grab. And then they celebrated so much when they caught one fish. And as a trout fisherman, I thought, these guys are nuts. I'm not spending, that inordinate amount of time and money, chasing for a tug. I can go over to the Deschutes and, match a hatch and catch a bunch of trout if I wanted to, or if they were willing, or go to the Matolia, someplace beautiful, even if I don't catch one, I could enjoy my time. However, for some reason, I felt like steelheading called me. I didn't want to be a steelheader. But I went out and bought a rod, and, it was a cheap $100 single hand rod. Went over to the river, told my wife, it was late, it was fall, told my wife, hey, I'm going to go over to the river and see if I can do this steelheading thing, First time I went out, I didn't know how to look at steelhead water. I knew how to look at trout water, but I didn't know anything about steelhead water. But I thought they were just big trout. First time I went out, spent about an hour, and I thought, this is so boring. So I went back home and had a beer instead. So I went back a week later and decided, okay, I'm going to put my time and effort into it. I started tying steelhead flies. I was tying with a vise back then. And they were, I wasn't following patterns. I was just kind of making my own, creations, and I thought they were pretty. And beauty is in the eye of the beholder. But when I look back at them now, they were kind of ugly. They were pretty ugly. Yeah. But I show up on the river, no one's there. I start hiking, a hill, and then I look down and I see something. There's some disturbance on the water, and I was curious. And again, it's that curiosity as a kid, as an angler. There's something in the water. What kind of fish is it? What was it? Was it, a dying fish? Was it the kind of quarry that you're after? And then so I walked down to the river and I looked closer at what it was, and it was a pod of steelhead, all sitting behind a rock. I can't tell you, Dave, how many there were, but there were. I mean, my eyes were bugging out. I was a little kid again,
Yeah. Is this in the fall?
It's like this was in the fall.
So kind of October, September, October.
Yeah, I think it was late October.
Yeah,
late October, maybe even November, but I think it was late October. And I just started not knowing how to swing for steelhead. I just started casting and stripping the fly in front of them, my wet fly. And, it was surprising. My line tightened up, and I thought, I snagged up a branch or something. I think it was on a dry line, but it was a heavy, iron, the fly I tied it on. And so I thought maybe I hung up on a branch, and obviously the fall, you have the wind and the leaves and the branches fall in. So I thought maybe I snagged, a branch. I started stripping it in, and then I felt the head shake.
Nice.
And I was hooked to a steelhead and kind of hooked for life. I think that day or that afternoon, it was about 2 in the afternoon, I hooked 7 steelhead,
Jeez.
and I landed only 2. The first one, that first one that I hooked, um, it broke me off while I had it in hand. So
Oh.
I got this buck in. I grabbed the tail, not ever having landed any trout of that size, of that nature. I thought, okay, I can just, grab the wrist of the tail, and it's just gonna comply with me. And I grabbed that wrist, and I could feel the power in the
Mm-hmm.
tail. But being a novice, felt the power, but I didn't grip any harder, and that thing went ballistic,
Hmm.
took off, and I was more worried about my rod, so I grabbed my rod because I didn't want that
Oh, yeah.
flying in the water, and I pretty much lost the fish right there. But fortunately, the steelhead gods, as they say, shine down on me and let me continue casting and catch a couple more.
Dang.
And that hooked.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm back home happy.
That's it. Yeah, I mean that. Well, your second trip out, you're getting into 7 fish. That's pretty hard to. That's pretty hard to beat, especially early on. Your first time. Did you? How long did it take you before you got your, you got the smack down where you were, it took you a while to hook into some more fish, or did you just consistently just start catching fish?
Yeah, I wish that was the whole. Yeah, to continue steelheading. Excuse me, the whole reason I continued steelheading was because I couldn't catch another one.
Yeah, exactly.
I went home and bragged to my wife, and she's like, she was kind of shocked at how big the fish was.
Oh, so
It was a
you had
hatch.
to keep her. Yeah, you had to keep her.
Yeah, it's a hatchery fish. So I brought it
Nice.
home. I was excited. And being my first steelhead to hand, I let the other one go because I thought, man, these things are so huge. What am I going to do with all this?
Yeah.
But I brought this one home and she took a look at it. And I had this like big smirk on my face. And I said, this steelheading is cake. These guys weren't even matching the hatch. They were just sitting there and I was throwing anything at them and they were eating it.
Wow.
And all of a sudden I thought I was I thought I was an expert on steelheading. But
Huh.
it wasn't until a year and a half later, and I tried hard. It wasn't until a year and a half later that I caught another steelhead. So
Yep.
that year and a half was what cemented my steelheading for
That's
the
it.
rest of my current life.
That's it. That's it. No, that's a cool story. So, well, let's just take it to that. Talking about that's back in your first steelhead, and now you
Yeah.
kind of have the way you do it. Can you talk about how you you fish? I mean, we're kind of right in the middle, or I guess we're kind of between summer, winter. There's still some fish around. I mean, how do you? What would you like? Would you rather love to talk more about summer steelhead or winter steelhead?
I enjoy talking about both, Dave.
Yeah.
But I do give the nod to summer steelhead, just because there's, the dry fly. The chances of a dry fly winter steelhead is slim and none.
Do you do that?
Conditions.
Do you do that quite a bit?
Yeah, I do it enough. I don't do it with as much gusto as summer steelhead dry fly fishing, just because the conditions are a little more different.
I keep hearing. I think is it Todd or who's the person that pretty much is exclusively skating flies in the winter?
Oh yeah, Todd. Todd's my I don't know, my hero. He kind of inspires me. Todd will fish dry line heavy irons in the winter, and he used to do it more regularly, but over the course of the last few years, he just has more fun fishing dry flies, and he will do it all winter long. I mean, even if conditions are tough. And he's risen winter steelhead on the dry fly. I mean, a lot of people have in the past. I shouldn't say a lot. Some people have
Yeah.
in the past, but I don't think with as much energy and as much aspirations as Todd. Todd is
He puts the
he
energy.
he's a different. Yeah, he's got a different mindset, and that's sometimes what it takes. I don't have that mindset as far as Todd with the dry fly
Yeah.
fishing. I've done it enough. Um, I've been I've raised a few. I don't think I've landed one, but I've raised a few steelhead on dry flies, winter that is. But summer and fall they're really I guess I really enjoy it. It's my favorite time of year for steelhead.
Well, And I guess just thinking about that, I guess if we are thinking going into the winter, so you do use a little bit lighter. I mean, can you talk about that? How you typically fish if you're not fishing dries in the winter? Are you fishing the kind of lighter lines? Are you still fishing wet flies? Are you
Yeah,
sinking down? Yeah.
yeah. Um, yeah, so I met Todd and online, and he had this post on a bulletin board, internet bulletin board about is anyone fishing dry line for winter?
Hmm.
And this was years ago, and again, I mentioned I have that weird thing that I was catching fish after I figured out what steelhead were doing. I was using sink tips, I was using mole leeches, I was using intruders, I was using tube flies, and I was getting pretty regular at catching winter steelhead.
Mm-hmm.
They're not that bright a fish. You just got to put it in front of them. But I didn't want it to get boring, and it's it's not it's different for my brain. So when Todd posted that thread about is anyone fishing for winter steelhead on a dry line, all the questions kind of popped up into my head again. What is this guy talking about? Winter dry line? And I was intrigued, and I started corresponding with Todd. And Todd has gotten his inspiration from Bill McMillan,
Oh,
and
okay.
yeah, all those my our other buddy Mark Stangelin, he mentioned that we're kind of standing on the shoulders of giants, of the
Yeah.
steelhead era. You've got your Bill McMillans, your Harry Lemires, your just all those guys, your Haig Browns. Those guys, they innovated, they learned, they observed, and we're just Todd was just Todd's kind of like one of those guys. He's kind of the connection. I mentioned to Todd, he's the connection back to the era where guys really knew how to fish, without the assistance of all the new technology that we might use these days. Um, and so when Todd mentioned that dry line winter fishing, I thought I got to try that sometime. Yeah, and
Hmm.
I do fish, dry lines in the winter. You have to use heavy irons to get the fly to sink down, and you have to really edit the water because winter flows are faster, and they end up being shorter if you're winter dry line fishing as far as the fishing areas that you can effectively fish. And you have to require, yeah, there's mending, there's, really keeping an eye on your line, I guess fishing the swing properly. So I think it takes a little more skill.
Yeah.
It's a lot, there's a lot more stuff going on than just putting on a tip, starting at the top and then swinging it down.
Yeah.
You really have to pay attention. And once you do get a grab, it's the bigger iron is more difficult to really set the hook into a steelhead. If you have a smaller, sharper iron, well, we'll fish sharp irons, but smaller hook, those go right into the hinge. But the bigger irons are a little more difficult. You really have to set into the fish. So
Mm.
you're really challenging yourself. It's a mindset again. Like, do I really want to, get this fish on a dry line in winter when it's cold, and I could really, spend more time catching fish and then
Yeah.
being at home and having a hot cup of coffee. But
That,
it's fun. It's
that's right.
again, it's a challenge.
And maybe.
But I do fish dries in the winter, and then because I tie Atlantic salmon flies, um, every once in a while I'll put on a light sinking poly leader because Atlantic salmon flies, they don't sink. There's just too much material on there to fish on the dry line. So and friends will give me Atlantic salmon patterns to fish, and so there's no way I can catch a steelhead. Well, it's
Yeah.
highly highly improbable to catch one on there when it's just fluttering on the surface, of the water.
Yeah.
But there's a
That's
time and
cool.
place, or maybe if I get lucky, yeah.
Yeah. Are you And are you, you're talking about the irons, and maybe we can dig into that a little bit, like the flies, the size of the hook and things. But are you, is the first thing the water, you're targeting water, say, more in tail outs or shallower water, or is there more to it than that as far as how you're getting them on? I mean, and on the surf, or well, we're talking dry line. So how far below the surface do you think your fly is?
Yeah, and it all depends on the push of the water and where you're fishing. Again, you step into a pool and you look at the water. At the top of the pool, you'll have the flow coming in, that choppy water. And Todd likes to call it the armpit, like in that corner, where the water
Yep.
comes in at the top of a riffle. There's that soft area there that steelhead, will nose into, and kind of rest. And winter steelhead, they're moving fish, and so those little pinch points are great places, for any kind of
Yeah.
winter steelheading, but especially that armpit. It's for dry line fishing. You can get that iron in there and let it sink and dangle, and then as you kind of look for, so steelhead, they'll move up. They don't want to fight the current. They're kind of moving up in softer areas. And if you look for those softer areas, whether at the armpit at the top of a riffle or down below, they'll come up through a tail out and they'll rest, on the side of a tail out. It's hard to fish at the gut of a run, with winter steelhead, because the flow is pretty quick.
Yeah.
So you kind of move quickly through that. And that's when the sink tips are more effective. To be honest, sink tips are way more effective for winter steelhead,
Yeah.
than you know than dry line fishing. But dry line fishing keeps me engaged in winter. If I was fishing a tip, I think I might get a little bored. But I could be wrong. I haven't fished a tip regularly in quite a while. So
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, totally. So you come in. So basically, if you look at a run, you've got the riffle at the, if the river's going from right to left, say
yeah,
you're on river left and you're fishing this run, and you got this riffle dropping down into where the pool starts, heading downstream, and the armpit is that little inside seam water. Is that the armpit?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, it
yeah,
is.
yeah. So you got that little water, and yeah, and that might be depending on the run. Yeah, you could have that little riffle right on the edge of the fast water, or even as it comes in, maybe it gets slower and slower. So I could see, how you could do that. And then as you go through the run, again, it picks up maybe some depth, some speed, and then eventually you get to the tail out. So are you saying just your average run, you're hitting the top and then going down the tail out, or are you kind of just fishing the slack water all the way through?
Yeah, you'll try to fish the slack water. So on steelheading, like anything, you need steelhead, because you need steelhead, a good number of steelhead to come in. Otherwise, you're just hoping to get lucky, with that one fish or two fish. I think my best year dry line fishing, winter steelhead, there was a good winter return. And when the fish were in the water, the more aggressive ones would take the better lies. And this is how I felt. The less aggressive ones would take certain lies that normally, weren't steelhead holding water, but would be great for the dry line. And so I hooked quite a bit of winter dry line steelhead that year. Now that, at this point in time, winter steelhead returns are kind of iffy on some of our waters. It's a little more difficult. So you have to really focus on the best spots. I think it's just like I think it's the same thing with dry fly fishing. You want to concentrate, at the heads of pools and the tail outs or any structure. So even in the gut of a pool, if you have structure there that seems like, hey, that might slow down a steelhead, or, that water looks a little different, I'm going to try to focus, my dry line swing on that water. And then you will cast differently. Sometimes I'll cast kind of upstream, backman, feed a little line, just try to get that fly to sink down quickly and then swing, right at the depth of where that rock is. Even though, the water is going to push it, you will have maybe 2 or 3 seconds where that fly is in the zone of a steelhead. And in contrast, if you're fishing a sink tip, you're always in that zone, or you're more
Yeah.
likely to be in the zone a little longer. So, I don't know exactly how many seconds my fly will be in the zone. I just, as an example, mine would probably be in the zone for about 2 seconds. Sink tip, maybe, 5, 6, 7, 8 seconds, as you can
Yeah.
slow that fly down even more. So, yeah, it's a game.
Yep.
It's like a video game, except in real life.
That's right. That's it. Yeah, basically, yeah, you got to choose your spots wisely, and
Yeah.
the odds. I mean, you're making it harder. And then if you add a dry fly, right, especially in the winter, you're at the
Yeah.
extreme. I mean, can you go? Is there a more extreme level than that? Dry fly on the surface, dry line. Is there anything else you could do?
I don't think
Yeah, that's
so.
it.
I think that's why I gravitated toward it,
Yeah,
Dave, because I didn't think there was any other way.
I know what it is. Here it is. It's all that, but instead you have a fly with no hook on it. So you just gotta like get the feel.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, and the one of the two guys that have done that. So Harry Lemire is a great inspiration, of mine, and also Lee Spencer. Both
Oh
those
yeah.
guys, have fished clipping their point off of their hook. I think Lee Spencer got that idea from Harry Lemire. Lee Spencer, on the North Umpqua, he's fished many years without a hook point on, and he just wants to raise fish. And Harry Lemire at one point had risen so many fish that he clipped the hook point off, and he said, he's just up for the rise. Everything else is just work, hooking the fish and landing the fish. He just wanted to see the fish come up and
Yeah.
rise to the dry fly. That's about as
Wow.
good, I guess, as you can get. And I don't think I'll ever achieve that because I really like to feel that fish, fight and
Yeah.
grab. It's part of being a kid. I guess those guys have ascended beyond being a kid.
Yeah.
I'm still a kid.
Well, it's
Yeah.
also that, I mean, for me too, and a lot of people, I mean, when you get a fish out there that's doing cartwheels on you, that's
Oh yeah,
something to
yeah.
feel.
I agree. When you're fighting a fish and it's a tug of war, you have again that weird sense of that hunter gatherer
Yep.
inside of you that you're like, hey, I need to land this thing. I want to see this thing up close. And you want to win that battle as that hen is like jumping at the bottom of the tail out, cartwheeling, running upstream. That's kind of fun. If
Yeah.
if it's if it just comes in, we've all hooked fish that were decent sized fish, and then they
Yep.
just kind of
Just come in.
come strolling. Yeah, you're like, well, that was like
Yeah.
hooking a bass, not bass or,
Oh yeah.
I mean, largemouth bass, you hook them, they thrash around, and then you just kind of reel them in.
Yep. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. No. Yeah. I think we've all, or a lot of people, if you fish for steelhead, caught a few, you've had those moments where you get that fish in, you realize it's a
yeah.
hatchery fish, you see it, and then it almost escapes, and you pounce on it. You like jump on it, and it's like this,
Yeah.
or you know what I mean, or you throw it up on the bank. I mean, it is that hunter gatherer, right? It is that like you are a predator, and you're not going to
Yeah.
let that thing get away.
And true, and that I did that when I first, landed those first hatchery steelhead. I
Yep.
didn't know how to land a fish, so I threw my rod on the bank, and I, realized after I lost that first hatchery fish that I'm not going to try to grab its tail. I'm going to grab its whole body and throw it on the
Exactly.
bank. So
Exactly.
yeah, just like a kid, just like a
Yeah.
kid.
Yeah.
But you know what? As you progress as an angler over time, you realize you start learning things, and I think that's the difference. For most fly fishermen, they're observant, they're learning. They try to understand nature a little more. They try to understand fish a little more. They try to be respectful of their resources, and respectful of other anglers. And it's tough sometimes. We were just my buddy Todd and I were just on a desert river yesterday. We had a grand time fishing dry flies, cold temps. We'd wake up in the morning, 30s. In fact, I had my sleeping bag was covered in frost,
Hmm.
but we'd wait her up and we'd fish dry flies early morning until late in the evening. And it was fun. We raised some fish. Todd got a fish in, popped off at as he was landing it. It was
Huh.
pretty much landed.
Yep.
I raised one. But as we were walking by, we saw one guy fishing, like kind of this big eddy. And we had walked past him early in the morning. And then when we came back, he was still there fishing that same eddy. And he hooked a big, nice fish as we were talking with him. And so we watched him land it. And then I asked him, what fly did you use? And he was like, oh, I was fishing a big streamer. And then in turn, he asked us what we were using. And we said, we're kind of idiots for the dry flies. So we were fishing dry flies. And he goes, well, you guys are using the wrong fly. Or he said, you guys are on the wrong river, I believe,
Oh.
kind of inferring that, they're not going to come up to dry flies here.
Yeah.
And so even within our little fly fishing community, there's still some people that have their, I guess, are more outspoken about their preference.
Yeah.
Whereas Todd and I, we like to fish dry flies. We don't try to force it on people, but
No.
we do have more fun with it, I think, than most. So
Yeah. No, I
but
hear you.
we're weird in that sense.
I hear you.
Yeah.
No, it's interesting because I haven't really, and that's why I'm interested. I've never really dug into it that deep, and I think it would be cool. I mean, I guess yeah, you get to that level where you've caught enough fish, and then you're kind of like, okay, well, let's try something else. But yeah, I'm thinking, you mentioned the heavy irons, and getting back to that, if we're talking, a dry line, what is a heavy iron? What is that like? What hook are you using? How are you tying that fly? What does that look like?
So, Bill McMillan wrote about using, his winter's hope. Everyone or a lot of steelheaders know that pattern.
Yeah.
And he tied that specifically to sink on a dry line. And the hook that he used was a partridge code M, which is discontinued. You have to find it, from your buddy's old, fly tying desk or what on eBay or whatever, whoever makes those hooks or sells those hooks, I should say. And it's a heavy iron. You really have to sharpen the iron, and the gap on it is huge. But it sinks. It's effective. And there's also that thought that, people are concerned about braining a fish. If you get that big iron, it's going to go into their head and you're going to kill the steelhead.
Yeah.
I haven't had that happen to me, because on the swing. Most of the time, the hook slides into the corner of the jaw. However, I also haven't hooked and landed a lot of them on that Code M iron. So, fortunate for the steelhead, unfortunate for me. You swing that iron, I get a fish grab, it takes off, and it's a long shank, it's heavy, the fish has got a lot of leverage, and plus you're pinching the barb. So if it jumps, head shake, that iron most likely comes off.
Is this like a big, like a 3/0, a big giant hook?
Yeah. So it all depends on what kind of water you're fishing. So a 3/0 to 5/0.
Okay, so these are big. Yeah, these are gigantic hooks, and
yeah,
and so there isn't a current hook out there, that there isn't a company that makes that similar hook.
No, nothing out there that has that kind of weight. I know I've caught, excuse me, early morning, man. I'm not used to early morning interviews.
Oh, yeah.
Or I'm not used to it at all.
All good.
But yeah, so I've caught winter steelhead dry lining on blue heron hooks, Dave McNeese hooks. And those are pretty good. And as well as the Alec Jacksons, those have some weight to them. Again, it's you have to really edit the water, and if you tie on those hooks, they're much lighter than the Code M irons. So you can't like put dubbing on that thing. You can't put a bunch of marabou on those things because they won't sink as quickly as a Code M. And so, whereas a Code M, say you're fishing, a primo zone 2 to 3 seconds, with a blue heron, you're in there for like maybe 1 second because that current's just going to push that hook up, So when I was catching them on blue herons and Alec Jacksons, it was a good return year, and I think the fishing was conducive for dry line. And editing the water. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of water on certain rivers that you can fish a blue heron and get plenty of sink. And again, the conditions too, Dave. If the water's warming up, and there's a fresh push of water, fresh push of fish, water's warming up, but the water's dropping, they'll come up. They'll come up and slam a fly, in the upper portion of the water column. So, there's. I wouldn't lose. Yeah, in the winter, I wouldn't lose hope at all. I'd keep fishing those irons, but I do prefer the Code M's. I prefer actually the 3/0 Code M's. Smaller. Yeah. So if you can find it, I shouldn't have said that, because now everyone's going to go buy the 3/0 Code M's.
I was going to say, you got right now thousands of people that are going to be, well, a smaller percentage of those will probably be trying out what we're talking about here, but there will be a few.
So I should preface, before you buy the Code M, winter dry fly fishing is super productive, right? No.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think we're getting the gist of this. It's interesting because, and you mentioned editing water, which I want to touch on as well. But this hook again, in my experience, I remember way back. I've talked about this before, but my first trip to the BC, I met this guy just online again, right? The online space, amazing. And he said, "Here's big." I think his name was Big Red or whatever. But you got to use these hooks, and he had these gigantic 3/0, 4/0 steelhead flies, and they were kind of like, it was basically like a big egg sucking leech. And he actually had, his thing was he tied this head out of thread, and he used like some lacquer, so it looked like this bullet shaped, but it was a huge hook, and I was like, wow, this is the biggest steelhead hook I've ever used, and it worked great. It worked
Really?
awesome. Oh man, it was such a great. It was basically a huge egg sucking leech, but I think that's why it was a heavier hook, and I'm not sure if it was a partridge. I think it was a partridge hook. I'm not sure if it was the code M.
Yeah, it could have been a code N. It's a lighter wire.
Yeah, I think it was the lighter one. I think it was a little, because it wasn't like, so is this code M? This is a like, well, and then so that's one question again, code N, code, but also why not just throw some weight on your fly? Is that not?
Yeah, no, that's another thing that you can do. I've tried, before. So for me, it's because I like tying classic patterns. I like sticking to the patterns. I don't like changing up the patterns. I don't like being too creative anymore. I think there's enough classic patterns out there that warrant some attention, and a challenge as far as tying. So for me, being creative, it's just, and some guys might, a lot of my friends are very creative tying, but there's enough classic patterns out there that I want to challenge myself with that, putting every piece of material that is called for in that pattern. And so that kind of keeps me away from adding, weight to a hook, because then it's not a classic pattern. But
Gotcha.
You definitely can add weight. I have actually tried, putting weight on the shank of a hook, like wrapping lead around it, and then tied a classic pattern over it.
Big fatty.
But it doesn't, on a dry line, it doesn't swim properly because it's so heavy. It doesn't kind of, that hook doesn't move in the current, because it's kind of, it looks like, it sinks and it looks like a rock.
Yeah.
And as it's swinging across, the feathers move, but again, to be honest, I don't think it really matters. It's more a thing to the angler.
Yeah.
I mentioned before, I don't think steelhead are that smart. In fact, we were just on the river, and an old timer that used to fish with Harry Lemire, he was comparing our brains in pounds and ounces versus a steelhead's brain, which is, they're not that smart. They're reactive. They'll eat a stick, they'll eat a rock. They'll smash anything that's in their way, or if they feel like it. So I think those little subtle movements, they keep the angler engaged. They keep them fishing with confidence. The fly it is, at least. So that
easier
bodes well
cast,
for me.
right, too.
Yeah, easier cast. Absolutely. You don't want to get frustrated.
No.
Steelhead fishing. Steelhead fishing is frustrating enough if you think that you're going to catch a lot of fish or get the fish. It's a mindset, and you can't be frustrated.
You got to at least enjoy. That's the thing I think about the steelheading, is that, in the casting, I mean, it's like you better enjoy casting every time.
Yeah.
Right? Do you feel when you're out there casting, and I'm not sure exactly, we can talk more about what you're casting, but do you feel like when you go out there, every time you go out, you're getting a little bit better, or are you at some, level you eventually are just like, man, I'm about as good as I'm going to get?
Yeah, and that's a very good question. I don't think I'm as good, and I don't think I'll ever achieve that. There are just some guys that are gifted with the way they cast, the way they can, obviously the competition casters are amazing. They set the bar high, and I try to do my best, but for me, there's so many. We mentioned Todd. Todd's a great caster. Todd, my buddy Todd, he can pick up any rod, from a switch rod to a 15-footer to a mid-size rod. He can fish a long belly. He can single hand, and he has that ability to move from one rod to another. I can't do that. I have 3 bamboo rods and I stick with just the 3 of them because I know if I add anything different, it screws up with my casting.
That's right.
And even though I have fun, I was fishing my 11-foot 5 bamboo, my James Reed rod this past couple days, and I had fun with her. She was a blast, but I still struggled. Sometimes there's just too much slack. There's too much stick in the water. Sometimes the wind comes at me differently, and I just things like that, little tiny things. I think it's similar to those guys that are into golf. I mean, you've got those great golfers. They still struggle. They still need coaches.
That's right.
In fact, this past summer, I asked Richard Harrington to show up on the river and help me with my cast because for some reason I wasn't doing the proper thing and I wasn't achieving the results I wanted. And so, and he was gracious enough. He thought I was joking around, and I said, no, man, I'm really struggling with my cast. I'd been casting the same rod, the same line setup for, I think 7 or 8 years, never changing anything. And for like a month, I couldn't cast it.
Yeah.
The reason was, I believe, Dave, was I picked up my daughter's rod.
Oh, right.
Yeah, a graphite rod, and for some reason it changed the way I was casting. Just that brief time. We were on the North Umpqua. I picked up her rod to kind of show her something, and then cast it for maybe 10 casts, and that just threw my mechanics off. So yeah, I'll never achieve that point where I'm as good as I can be at casting.
Yeah.
And the same thing too with steelheading. I don't think Todd and I were discussing the various dry fly takes, and that's what we enjoy so much. The fishing's kind of the same. We target the same types of water. We target the runs. We look at the gauges. We look at when the river is busiest and when it's not, and the temperatures. So those are kind of standard for dry fly fishing. But what's different every time is how the steelhead reacts to the dry fly. We've had the follows, the shark attacks, the big toilet bowl flushes, the little, the little trout rise where you're like, okay, there's my dry fly swimming across, and you just see a little dimple. And you think, oh, that's just a trout. And you set up on it and it's a big fish, and
yeah.
So those are the things that keep things exciting for us, the different ways that steelhead come up and eat. So
yeah.
But yeah, I don't think I'll ever get to the point my casting will be great. So I have to enjoy and be content with what it is now. Just keep trying to improve on it.
That's cool. No, it's awesome. And I forgot about that too. Yeah. I mean, you've got the bamboo, so you've got pretty much all of the, I'd call it the extreme, stuff. I mean, it's amazing too. I mean, maybe we talk a little bit about that just first with the line. So for winter fish, we're talking winter steelhead. Are you just fishing your normal dry line that you would be fishing for summer steelhead?
Yeah, I would be. I'm using, for my winter rod, I was using a fall favorite 45, and then a buddy guide of ours, Mark Schamberg, mentioned that James Reed likes Rio Steelhead Scandy lines on his rods, and he was generous enough to let me borrow his for a while, and I started casting that on my winter rod, and it's got enough grainage to throw over a big heavy iron. So yeah, it's a Scandy rod. I think it's like in the mid 30s as far as how long it is.
Yeah.
And I will put on a long mono leader on it. Maybe about 15, 15 feet.
Big long one.
Yeah. So that and it turns over the fly, and so with that long leader kind of cuts into the water, and then the Scandy line will kind of keep it on the surface. Somewhat on the surface. So I've had plenty of friends that tell me, hey, why don't you use those, I don't even know what they're called. They're like different sink lines or, shooting heads. I don't know what they're called.
You mean not the poly leaders?
Not the poly leaders, no, but the heads are like multi-density heads.
Oh, right.
And
where there's an intermediate and a sink. And
intermediate. Yeah. And they said, yeah, you'll get down a little deeper, and they're super helpful and generous because all my friends want me to catch steelhead for some reason, or winter steelhead.
Yeah.
But for me, if I hook one on those lines, those multi-density heads, I feel like it's not dry line fishing. You're trying to get down and slower. So it's And plus I've hooked plenty of winter steelhead on sink tips, and so it's not some sort of like, whoa, I caught a fish, even though it's fun. I want to catch one on something different. I think one of my more remarkable winter steelhead fish, I was fishing my home river, and I had tied up a code N, yeah, iron. I tied a pattern called, gosh, it's a Traherne pattern, Traherne Major Popkin Traherne or something like that. Some name I can't remember his first name. This was back in the glory days of Atlantic salmon tying.
Oh, okay.
He had this pattern that was pretty exquisite. And so I tied that in hand, and I thought, I bet no one's ever fished this pattern on this river, and I was able to hook and get a fish in on that pattern. And so, just using the dry line without sinking heads, just editing water, and so it makes it funner for me that way. I don't think it's this. I don't think it would be fun for everyone, but it's for me, it's a neat thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, just my regular Scandi shooting heads for winter.
Yeah.
Um,
And then what was the name of the bamboo rods you're using? What's it called?
Yeah, James Reed.
Yeah.
James Reed is out of the Campbell River in BC. And he's an awesome dude, awesome rod builder, and a pretty dang good fly tire. Although we don't see many of his flies anymore, but yeah, he makes. There's a lot of fantastic bamboo rod makers out there, but
yeah, there are.
I've got 3 of his rods. One of them I got off the classified section of Spay Pages,
Oh,
off of
nice.
Spay Pages, and that was my first one. And I was just enthralled by it. That first rod has caught many steelhead, many dry fly steelhead. So
Do you feel that I think, and I haven't used any really spay bamboos, but I just think of the trout bamboos. I mean, obviously the feel is a little more, at least in my experience, is noodly, softer. I mean, are those rods? Is that the difference? Is that you get more feel compared to say some of these other? Because there are some nice graphite rods that make a really softer rod too, right?
yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think there's even glass rods nowadays that are pretty
right.
good too.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's just I appreciate the craftsmanship of the bamboo rod makers, and the time and effort they put into it. But to be honest, the first time I fished the bamboo spay rod or two-hander, I was coming from a Scandi rod,
Yep.
quick, light tip, Scandi casting, and then picked up the James Reed rod off the Spay Pages, and I did not think I would like it. I was on the river, I was casting it, and I was like, holy smokes, I think I made a mistake, buying this rod off of that guy. But it was just because I didn't know how to cast a bamboo rod at that point. I was trying to cast myself instead of letting the rod cast the line. But as soon as I spent time with the rod, it worked its magic. And I realized it's a great, powerful tool. It's a fun tool, and it fights fish amazingly.
That's right. Better probably.
And you get, yeah. And James Reed mentioned, I think one of his quotes was, well, I'm not even going to say it because I'll misquote him.
Yeah.
But
we could put it in the show notes if we get it right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll try to put it in the show notes. But
yeah.
You get that cast, and then you're swinging that line and you're holding that rod, and then the fish grabs, and then that rod, bends all the way to a cork, using all its power fibers. You bring that fish in, and then you have that bamboo action, preventing that fish from breaking that tippet, that you see a lot with like fast action rods, or it's got the cushioning effect, I think, as you're landing the fish. And obviously it's bamboo, so it's got some things that you don't want to be high sticking bamboo. You don't want to throw your bamboo on the rod bank. You want to be aware of it. But if you fish with it enough, you know how to handle it.
Yeah.
You know how to land fish.
How do you transport it if you're fishing around? Is there
It's same way. I have a rod tube and I use that. But when it's put together, just a rod rack, roof topper, or whatever. I use a sumo. Yeah, I use a sumo. Yeah.
Okay.
A sumo rod rack, I think it is.
Yeah.
I don't know what it's called.
Sure.
It works fine for me. It's adjustable, and I've taken the bamboo rod and plus the reel on it, on dirt roads. I've gone, 60 miles an hour, maybe 65 just to test it.
On the outside, just on the roof,
on the outside,
or on the hood,
on the roof.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
that's cool.
It does fine. Yeah. I haven't had too much worry about it. Well, once in a while, I'll be concerned, if you're on a gravel road and there's like probably logging trucks, going by. They kick up a rock and then, it'll hit your vintage reel or hit your bamboo rod. But, those are things that, can worry you, but it's not been a problem so far.
Cool.
And I really love casting.
No, it's awesome. I would love to dig more, and maybe down the line, if we can get you back on, we'll dig more into some of the equipment and stuff. But maybe we just finish this off. We talked a little about the lines and the rod. So reel wise, what's your reel that's set up with that rod?
So I have my winter rod.
Yeah.
I have a Barlow's Perfect style reel. It's just it's an awesome beast. So with the bamboo rods, depending on how big they are, you really have to match it with a heavy reel to just balance it out.
Yeah.
And it's got a beautiful growl to it, and when the fish grabs and takes off on a run, the growl becomes a scream. Yeah, so it's a neat experience, especially in winter. If I'm fishing a wet fly and it's you're cold, it's in the afternoon, and you're thinking, man, after this run, I'm going in and having a nice cup of coffee or maybe a whiskey to warm you up. And then, you're sitting there cold, you're standing in the water's, your line's slowly swinging, and all of a sudden the fish grabs and you hear that pitching growl, and then it starts screaming. It just wakes you up, warms you up on the inside. So that's the Farlow Perfect.
Yeah. And what was the company? What was the brand?
Oh, it's a Farlow's.
Okay.
It's an old reel. I'm pulling it off the shelf right now.
Yeah.
C. Farlow's Ltd.
Okay.
London.
So, right. Cool. So this thing's clicking, like slowly the fish is starting to eat it. It's clicking.
Yeah, it'll click, and when the fish feels it, the fish is like, I don't like the sound, or I don't like the feel of this hook, and fish takes off and it just goes, it's.
Can you turn off the sound on it?
No, I don't think I can.
That's interesting.
I'm not smart enough.
I find myself sometimes, because I guess that's my competitive nature, but sometimes if it's especially in a busy spot, I'll make sure I want to be quiet, because sometimes you can land fish without people knowing you even have fish on. No,
I agree. Yeah. My buddy Todd has a way that he's able to disengage the pawls, because he'll fish his town run, and he doesn't want anyone to know that. He's got Hardy Perfects and other loud reels like Youngs and stuff like that, and they're loud. And so when you're in town and people are around, you definitely want to be incognito. So he's got a way he does it. I don't know how to do it, so I just stick with it. And plus, that when I fish, there's not many people around, and if there are people around, I don't go there. Exactly. I go somewhere else.
That's what you need to do. That's cool. Cool, Adrian. Well, we're going to get out of here pretty quick. I just wanted to start. I think this is the perfect time to wrap it up. I have this the 222 top 2 flies tips and resources that I like to wrap things up with. And we've already been talking. We haven't dug into the Titan Hen. I think maybe we'll have to leave that to the next time, because I think that's a whole nother amazing. I think way you're bringing this down to, this old. I can't think of it as an old school level, right? You're kind of bringing it back, but what about flies? So what is your if it's wintertime, you're fishing a dry line, you're going out there on your water, what 2 flies are you bringing?
Okay. Well, can I preface this with just a snide remark? But Dave, why do we have to talk about winter flies? It's still fall steelheading right now.
That's true.
But anyway.
That's true. Well, the reason being is that the great thing about this is that even though right now it's 2020 November, it right now could be 2025 with the person that's listening to this, and it could be it could be January.
I just wanted to put it in there that I prefer dry flies. But...
Or did I say 2005 or did I say 2025? I'm not talking about time traveling, but yeah, we're talking.
No,
Yeah. This is
Um,
that's amazing about the podcast. I mean, I still occasionally listen back to episodes
yeah,
because I started this thing in 2017.
yeah.
And
Oh,
it's
wow.
evergreen. It's evergreen content, man. I mean, the people that are listening to this for years, these things will be out there. They'll be like, "Oh my God, Adrian, this guy! I've never even heard of anybody fishing dry flies. Look at this guy!" And you know what I mean. For the first time, somebody's going to hear that.
Well, as for me as a fan, when you had John Gierach on your show, he was a big inspiration to me to start fly fishing.
Oh wow,
So yeah, so I listened and I saw that and I was like, oh, I'm gonna take a listen to this. So
yeah,
anyway,
I
but
know.
yeah, so my winter flies, because I tie classic patterns, and I mentioned to you that classic patterns, they have so much material on there that they're hard to sink. I actually have to edit my classic patterns, or not mine, but the classic patterns, to see which has the least amount of materials in which I can create or subtract materials from, just like one or two fibers, even though I have all the materials in there, to let them sink. I like Rogan patterns, Michael Rogan. He was he was one of the greatest hand tires, or tires in hand,
Hmm.
back in the day. But his materials have a lot of stuff to it, so I really have to make sure that I don't put too much on those patterns. Right now, I'm really excited about tying the silver RD, which is a pattern that it's a mixed wing. So I think a lot of your viewers probably are not too aware of a classic Atlantic salmon patterns.
Yeah.
But the RD or the mixed wing patterns are really great because they're not married. I believe married wings have less movement in the water
Oh yeah.
because it's kind of a stiff wing, even though they'll still catch fish. I've caught fish
Yeah.
on married wings in the winter. But the mixed wing patterns, the fibers aren't married, so they're kind of undulating. They're independent of each other as you're slowly trying to slowly swing it across the water. The silver RD is one,
Is that
because it's
RD
got long.
like? How do you spell RD?
Oh, it's ARDEA.
Oh, okay.
And I'm going to tie it pretty soon here. I was gifted an iron, a Code N iron, that was from Harry Lemire's own tying kit.
Oh wow.
And so I've been holding on to it for a few years, trying to, figure out what pattern I really want to tie on it. So I'll be tying that here in the next few days or the next week or so. And I'll use it for winter. The cool thing about it is, not only is it going to be an Atlantic salmon pattern, but it's on Harry's hook,
Yeah.
and I will be fishing it dry line, so it's not going to snag up and I'm going to lose it on the rock. Hopefully not, at least.
That's
Hopefully it won't
right.
sink too.
That that's the other big advantage. Well, I mean, I guess it's not a huge advantage because
You're lost with flies.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, losing flies because it does happen. But yeah,
So yeah, the silver RD and Rogan patterns. There's so many different patterns. I don't,
yeah,
and I like Bill McMillan's Winter's Hope. It's super effective. It's a steelhead fly for sure,
hmm
Northwest steelhead fly. It's not Atlantic salmon pattern. So it's built for my rivers in the area. It's designed for that. But I haven't tied it. I think I haven't tied it because I have the classic Atlantic salmon patterns to tie.
yeah.
I kind of gauge things like, which is more challenging. I think one year well, not one year, but a few years ago, I tied Sid Glasso's orange heron.
Yep.
Sid Glasso, another giant of our
Oh yeah.
steelheading history. But I wanted to catch a fish in the Olympic Peninsula rivers on a Sid Glasso orange heron on a dry line, and I was able to hook one
Hmm.
on a yacht. So uh,
Yep.
I don't tend to go back once I've done it. On a pattern, I don't tend to go back to it. It doesn't become a favorite pattern. What happens
Oh,
with those
gotcha.
patterns that I put it on my board. I have like this board of flies, because each fly that I've hooked, it reminds me of a specific time and the conditions of when I hooked that fish. So yeah,
That's
I
cool.
actually right now I'm staring at that orange heron I tied,
Oh wow.
I think 4 years ago. I'll probably never tie another orange heron, unless someone begs me to tie one. But
How many flies are on that board?
oh man, that's a tough one. Um,
Could,
it's
could you take a picture of it and is that something we could post so we can see what it looks like?
Oh yeah, yeah, I for sure can.
That'd be
I'll
cool.
take a picture of it. Yeah, and it's not all, I've caught, there's other flies too that I've hooked fish on, but they're not remarkable patterns. I
Yeah.
mean, it's nothing that, so the patterns I put on that board are patterns that mean a lot to me. It's funny because a lot of them, it starts off as a lot of classic Atlantic salmon patterns, wet flies, and then it's being overtaken by dry flies,
Yeah.
and not the same dry flies. They're all different dry flies because I want to catch a fish with a different pattern as much as I can.
Yeah.
Although I mentioned the two winter flies, I gotta say, Dave, I gotta mention my two favorite flies that I'm fishing for dry fly fish in the
Oh, yeah.
summer, and it's got to be. I'll stand by this. It's I think the greatest steelhead fly ever made, ever created, was Harry Lemire's grease liner.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a great
Number
one.
one, it's a dry fly, and Harry was someone that observed the water and designed his flies in such a way that they would work well. And I think the grease liner, being the icon that Lemire is, uh, the grease liner, you can use it anywhere. You can hook
Huh.
fish anywhere on any river with a grease liner.
Yeah.
So I just think that's the greatest
It's
steelhead
a it's a
dry fly.
great it's a great kind of it's a really natural, right? I mean, there's not a lot of
Yeah,
color on it.
supernatural. Yeah, and I'll probably make some people upset because you have the Sid Glassos, awesome tires,
Yeah.
the Dave McKenzie. But I gotta say, you put up like the orange heron, which is a beautiful wet fly, versus a dry fly. I'm gonna say, hey man, the dry fly's got to win every time.
Yeah.
That's just me though.
Oh, yeah.
For campfire fodder, between
Yeah.
friends.
Cool. All right,
And
so we
I
got
think I think the other
yeah.
one, I
Yeah, what was
think
the
the
other
other
one?
one, sorry, you've gotta pay homage to Roderick Haig Brown's
Yeah.
Steelhead Beat. It's just a great pattern. It's tough to keep afloat. It's tough to fish properly. And that's the one I'm using a lot these days, just because I think it's more challenging, to keep it on the surface and to keep it fishing proper. So I really enjoy that pattern. So
That's
yeah.
perfect. Yeah,
Sorry,
no.
man, I kind of carried away.
No, it's
I love
amazing.
fly.
I I love that you did that. I love that I mean, because again, this is to me, it feels like a really traditional, we're paying homage to the people before us, and you just talked about some of the most important people in the steelhead in the history, and that's part of the reason I do this podcast. I'm trying to document some of this, so I love those stories.
Yeah, and I try to, we got to give a nod to those before us that, really, hit the rivers, and they were the ones that I guess laid the groundwork for the proper way to steelhead. And over the course of time, with technology advancing and with internet, things
Yeah,
change. But I think if we can dial it back a bit and try to do it the right way, and I'm not saying dry fly is the right way or winter dry line is the
right.
right way,
Or
but
yeah,
yeah, just to
intruder.
have the proper mindset. Yeah. And intruder's okay, but just have the proper mindset and give credit where credit is due,
Yeah,
So
yeah. No, it's cool. It's Well, let's keep going on that. So we got your flies, and what about some tips? Let's bring it back to winter steelhead again. We'll just stick with the dry line, in
yeah,
fishing either a dry fly or just a wet fly. What you have a couple tips you give somebody if they're maybe going out,
winter
tomorrow to
steelheading.
fish?
Yeah. So for winter steelheading, you really want to keep an eye, here in the Northwest, we have the weather systems that come in. If it's cold and clear and you're trying to fish a dry line wet fly for winter, cold and clear is going to be tough. And I
Mm,
think it's going to be tough everywhere. Even with a sink tip, you have better chances with a sink tip. What you
yep.
want is a good push of water, a good, dump of precipitation, and then you got to watch the gauges. You got to know the rivers. As soon as it's dropping and clearing a bit, that helps the fish move up. And with a dry line, when the water comes in, you'll have a lot more softer areas, on the edges, on the margins of pools and runs, and fish will come up and travel along those softer areas. And even in, I actually prefer like not so clear water. If the
Mm-hmm.
water's clear, the fish isn't gonna more likely travel up those shallow areas. So if you got a little, color in winter water, but the water's come up, fish those soft areas watch the gauges, and watch the temps as well. I think I have had more chances with a dry line or more hookups with a dry line in late winter or early spring, for winter steelhead. As the water temperatures warm up, and I don't, you can fish if it's a mild winter, you can fish early morning and have good success. But I feel like around, I don't know, Dave, maybe 10 o'clock,
10 o'clock, honestly,
things have warmed up. Yeah, and the fish metabolism is kind of moving. Again, there's so many factors. You have to be fortunate, you have to be lucky, you have to be close to a river, and you got to be able to drop everything when that window opens up, which is not always great for responsibility in life.
No.
So,
You said John Garrick. I got to go back to that one because I love the story. I can't remember what book it was, but I talked to him about that. I asked John about, he had this story because John's writing, his stories are his life, right? It's not like
oh yeah,
but he had that one where he was early in his life. I can't remember if it was his wife or whatever, but the roof was leaking, and
yes,
but he had fishing to do, so he kept fishing and fishing, and finally he found this. I think there was a fish tank in the house. He just moved it over to catch the drip, and solved the problem. And he was able to fish. He thought that was a fine, a fine deal. I mean, we're kind of crazy, right? I mean, we're steelhead fishermen. I mean, how crazy are we? Is that like just normal stuff there?
I think as steelheaders, we feel like it's normal. But the people that aren't in our circle, they look at us and they probably really think that we're kind of a bit skewed, in the brain. There's just not something right. And which is funny because I mentioned that story to my wife about John Gierock.
Oh, cool.
And my wife's not a steelheader at all or a fisherman. She's fished with me a few times. But she looked at me and almost with that look of how irresponsible is that you don't fix.
I know.
It's brilliant.
I know it is. I'm with you. That's cool. So, well, I interrupted you there on. So where were we at? So, well, you had one awesome tip. I mean, just that one is humongous. When to go? Would there be another tip you want to provide for, again, on that same line with the dry line?
Yeah, with dry line fishing, I think the biggest thing, Dave, aside from watching water levels and all that, is just to have the mindset that, I'm going to enjoy this time editing water. I'm not going to gripe or get frustrated about not catching fish. I'm not going to, receive texts from my buddies who hooked the fish here on this tip, and feel like I'm missing out on it. Winter dryline fishing is a challenge. It's not for, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's something that you're called to, that you really want to challenge yourself in. It's quite different from dry fly fishing in the summer for steelhead. I actually feel I fish better with a dry fly than with a wet fly in the summer. I actually think I can catch more fish with a dry fly than a wet fly in the summer. So
that's cool.
Versus winter. Yeah, and that's just because of the experience I've had. And I'm kind of pretty new to the game, but I've been fortunate to fish a lot of dry fly water in the summer to really learn and observe the fish behavior.
Yeah.
But winter dry line, there's no way, and it's not about out fishing your buddies. It's about enjoying your time the best way possible. It's about learning how to cast that iron. And it's, and it's funner casting with a dry line, to be obvious. But these days, with our technology and lines, it's actually fun as well to cast, sinking lines because we're so advanced now that you could pretty much cast sinking lines just like you would a dry line.
Yeah,
and
exactly. So it's not a big.
You really, it's got to be someone that says, hey, I want to challenge myself to do this, and stick with it for a winter. And to be honest, you have to have fish coming in. It's tough to start something that's challenging when there are poor fish returns, because then you don't have that positive,
reinforcement.
I guess reinforcement. That's the word. Yeah. But again, some people, they're just fortunate. They're fishy people. They get in the water, they'll hook a fish. I had a fellow message me. I was trying to help him, with a dry fly fishing in the summer, and it's been a tough year, for everyone.
Yep.
But he got on the river, a well-known river here in our area, and he was hooking dries, or who can fish on dries, I should say, steelhead on dries, was having a blast. And, kind of on a down year. And so you never know,
Yeah.
you go out there and you just experience the unexpected, and it's a fun deal.
That's cool.
So, yeah, I think, that's my mind. That's the mindset.
Perfect. And before we get into just the kind of maybe a couple of resources for what we're talking about here, you mentioned editing water. Can you just clarify that terminology? What is editing? Is that what does that mean exactly?
Yeah. So, if you're dry line fishing in the winter, and you come upon a water, a stream or a section of stream that is just flowing fast, you just don't waste your time on it, because you're not going to be able to get your fly down in that water. You'll end up spending 2 hours in the cold weather, in unproductive water. A sink tip angler can see that water and can get their fly down, and they can slow their swing because of their sink tip. So they're able to fish that water. So as a dry line angler, you got to look at that water and then just chalk it up to like, hey, that sink tip water, I'm going to let the other dudes have that. And so, you keep driving down the road or you float down the river and you look for the softer pools. You look for structure. You look for softer pools that will hold fish. And it takes a little bit of time. It took me a few years to kind of figure out, what really is good dry line water. Because in the wintertime, it's cold. You don't want to spend 3 hours fishing unproductive water. You want to get in a good water right away and spend your 3 hours really fishing that water well. And that really is editing, just
Gotcha.
looking at water that your fly is going to swing slower at. What kind of water? You don't want to obviously fish frog water. That's not going to work for you, but you got to have some moderate flow, nice soft chop.
Yeah.
And again, we talked about water levels. Certain runs, that fast shoot might be different when there's a big push of water, a big precipitation, and the water level comes up. And then it starts flooding the banks a little, and then it's softer in the banks. And then that might be the time to fish that fast water, run last week, and then you show up this week and you're like, oh, we got a big dump of rain. I'm going to go over there and it's fishing softer now. And,
that's cool.
And the other thing, spend some time on those rivers, during low water years, or maybe in the fall or summer before the rains come, looking at the structure, in the shallow portions of the river, because in the winter, those will be, will be covered with water, and then you can know where the depressions are, where the rocks are, and where the water will be softer in that area.
Yeah,
so
that's awesome. That's awesome. Cool. Well, let's take us out of here with the in two resources. This could be book, magazine, video, anything you want to throw out there. And you noted, Spay Pages, obviously that's a really good resource. Anything else you would note as kind of top two for dry line winter steelheading?
Yeah, I mean the number one resource for that is pretty much the dry line and dry fly steelheading Bible to a lot of us is Bill McMillan's Dry Line Steelhead. It's a great book. It's great to learn from a brilliant mind on how to fish. He's got so much data on there. He's got temperature. He's got hooks. He's got patterns that work well. And he has experience. Me. And I'm super honored and humbled to be, on your program. I'm just a big fan. I don't have the experience that these giants have, but Bill McMillan has put it in his book. He's such a gracious and generous guy. I think if you want to get into dry fly fishing and winter dry line fishing, Bill McMillan's book is probably one of the top, resources you can have. Yep. As far as inspiration wise, I think Todd Hirano's blog, super for resources, just to get a pep talk. If you're feeling down, you're like, dang, I've spent 4 weeks now trying for this winter steelhead, and I can't. Pop into his blog, read some of his old stories, his suggestions. Send him a message, because that guy, he's like positive. He's like super positive, beyond belief. I've fished with Todd under many different conditions, and there's always hope with Todd, even though the conditions are ridiculous. I mean, I've been with him where he's raised fish where it's just there's no way anyone should be fishing in these conditions. And he's raised steelhead. Or winter time. I think 2 or 3 years ago, maybe 2 years ago, he almost raised and landed a fish on a dry fly every month of the year, almost,
Dang.
and
Yeah.
only by a couple days or something like that.
Yeah.
So,
Wow.
again, I go back to experience. He's got the experience. Bill McMillan has the experience, so I draw from that. And then the mindset. And I think, and lastly, I know you said two resources.
No,
I think just for the proper idea of what steelhead fishing is like and what it should be like is Haig Brown. Read a lot of Haig Brown books. Roderick Haig Brown, because he's a great writer. He's kind of like I guess like John Gierach. He's a writer first and then a fly fisher, and that's what Haig Brown was. He was a writer, and then steelhead captivated him. He spent a lot of the time on his home river, the Campbell River in BC, and he observed. He fished different ways, and it's really the way to be as a steelheader. You have to be observant. So, yeah,
that's awesome.
Those are great resources to
That's
start
awesome.
off with.
Well, you've been fairly, humble, yourself as well. But you're out there. Your name, like I mentioned at the start, is popping around a lot when it comes to dry fly fishing and what you're doing. And it's you and Todd and and Rick and the crew out there. You could write a book, right? Probably if you wanted to. Have you ever thought about doing something like, down the line?
I've had friends and, suggest writing a book, and I don't know how to go about that. It's tough. I have, the fun thing is I have so many neat stories. And I always feel it's hard, and the steelheading community is so huge. It's hugely generous and friendly. For the most part, right? Online or in corresponding with each other and meeting each other, mostly on the river. We're super friendly to each other. And so it's hard for me to write a book because I don't know, man. I feel like everyone's already experienced it,
Yeah.
But then again, I think, most of the current generation, they don't have that connection to that older era that has experienced the great steelheading, in the past.
Right.
Bill McMillan wrote his book. There's like articles from, about Sid Glasso, Harry Lemire. I may someday, write something about my experiences with Todd and Richard Harrington and those other guys, because there's just fun stories, fun story. Steelheading not only revolves around the fish, it revolves around what goes around in steelhead camps, what goes around in flies, and some things that might happen that is quite comical, and so.
Cool. Well, that's about all I have for you. I guess if people want to check you out, they can go to, let's see, on Instagram, right? Adrian Cortes Steelhead.
That's correct. Yeah.
Awesome.
Oh, I found the quote from James Reed. You want me to say it now?
Yeah, let's go for it.
So James Reed, a builder of bamboo rods, one of the things that I quote him as saying is, "You don't just feel the head shakes, you feel the heartbeat." And I thought, I thought that was kind of a romantic way. And it's just a neat thing, to feel the craftsmanship, but then to feel it at work as you're casting and fighting a fish. Just beautiful things to enjoy on the river.
That is a killer quote. And hey, before we get out here too, the tying in hand, we didn't have time to dig into what you do there, but are there, if somebody wanted to watch videos or learn more about it, where would you send somebody?
Oh yeah, I'll be honest. I think the best way, there's only one fella, a wonderful tyer and friend, Jin Woo Lee. He does videos, I believe now, of his tying in hand, and so he's a great resource to to watch.
Is that Jin like the drink?
Jin,
Yeah.
Jin, and Woo Lee, WOO and Lee LEE.
Oh yeah.
Jin's awesome. He back in 2012, I think he started just a little before me tying in hand. Around that same time, I started tying in hand, and he's fantastic. I've tried to do videos, but it's so hard because you're as opposed to a vise when you're filming a vise, obviously the hook is just sitting there, but in tying in hand, you're always moving. So
You know,
Yeah, Jin does a pretty good job, I think, of
Yeah.
of showing some technique to it. So.
Gotcha. I was just gonna say the cameras are getting pretty amazing. I mean, right? You got the GoPro, everything else, but
Yeah.
cool, man. Well, I'll let you get out of here. This has been awesome. Appreciate all the tips and everything, and I think probably inspired at least a few people to give it a shot this winter. I think I'm gonna have a dry line in my satchel this year.
Hey, awesome.
I'm gonna give it a shot. I'll let you know if I hook into one, and I'll thank you for it later on.
Oh, I'd appreciate that. Yeah, because we all, us dryline buddies, we all kind of inspire and instigate each other, and kind of I don't know, support each other in such a difficult, arduous journey. So
exactly. Cool, man. Hey, I appreciate the time. I'll talk to you soon.
Hey, cheers, my friend.
So there you go. If you want to find all the links and show notes, just go to wetflyswing.com/169. Do you have a business and want to grow your online influence? If you head over to my new show, outdoorsonline.co, you can track the journey of the launch of our next podcast. This is going to be a fun one. We're documenting the entire process of getting a new podcast out on the road. And you know what they say about podcasters in general? If you've started a podcast, there's a really good chance that you can't stop at just one. It's kind of this crazy, funny thing. So I'm on getting ready for my third, and that's great. I'm excited about that. I want to thank you again today for stopping by and check out the show. Looking forward to catching up with you soon. Hope to maybe see you online or on the river.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com. And if you found this episode helpful, please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes.